Hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. This is Simon Leuty from Livingstone, and today we're going to be talking about how to build the perfect SAM team with 7 skills. Before we get into it, I'm just going to do a little bit of housekeeping. If anybody has any technical problems, there should be a grey button in the bottom right hand corner of your screen, and that'll put you through to the guys who can help you with any technical problems. And if you want to ask any questions throughout the presentation, there should be a green button somewhere up on the top right hand side, so you can ask those questions, and as long as we have enough time, we'll try and get around to some of those questions at the back end of the webinar. So without further ado, let's get started. Okay. For some of those who have been on some of our previous webinars, you might have seen this slide already. This is sort of looking at your SAM journey, and it's really designed to try and find out where you're at in that SAM journey. This is sort of the roller coaster that people go on when they usually get involved in a SAM program. The first thing they do is they find out that they need to do something about SAM. And there's usually some kind of a catalyst that kicks that off. What usually happens is they'll go out and buy a piece of technology to solve this very complicated problem. After a little while, they'll find out that doesn't do absolutely everything they expected it to do or wanted it to do. And that, by the way, is no fault of the technology. Without being too cliche, to do these initiatives properly, you really need to be looking at people, process, and technology combined. And sometimes the people in the process are left behind. And what we're going to do is we're going to spend a lot of time talking about the people that are required to ensure that these initiatives are successful. At this point, usually people go and get some expert help. Might be external, might be internal, and we'll talk about some of the skills that are required to support on that upward journey. And then what we end up doing is having SAM as BAU. Now, the only problem with SAM as BAU is it's fundamentally changed over the last number of years, and it's really not looking like it's going to stop. So at the beginnings of SAM, it was a very compliance-driven initiative, usually stimulated by some kind of an audit or a commercial risk, and the investments were made to try and support some kind of compliancy position. Now that was fine then, but now as SAM evolves, it's becoming a lot more proactive. There are an awful lot more people who are interested in that information, which is great because it's more value driven, and compliancy isn't forgotten. But what it means is that the programs, the technology, the people and the process really need to evolve. So rather than just compliancy, now we're thinking about commercial optimization. People are thinking about migration to the cloud. They want to budget more effectively. They want to understand how this software is being used. And what that does is it opens SAM up into a wealth of other individuals and decision makers within a business who are really hungry for this data, this clean set of information to go and drive better decision making. So the goalposts are changing. You know, people still go through these troughs of disillusionment, but just know that SAM as BAU is very, very different than it used to be. And again, today we're going to try and focus on the key resources and skill types you would need to try and evolve as the market evolves and the landscape evolves along with you. So let's take a look at them, and we will dive into each one of these in detail as well. So in the middle, you obviously need your SAM manager. And then what we're going to have around the outside in that core set of competencies is SAM governance, licensing expertise, huge amounts of data processing for any of you, those of you who sort of do this already. There's huge volumes of data, commercial execution, contracts and legal expertise, project management, and tools administration. Now, let me be clear. I'm not suggesting that everybody needs to put 7 people in their SAM team, and we'll talk about sizes a bit later. One thing I will say is this is usually a mixture of a number of different areas. Dedicated SAM professionals, sometimes these are part-time resources from other parts of your business. Potentially, people have mixed models where they get external support in particular areas as well, and we'll talk about some of the popular areas to get that as well. What you will not find is a single individual who holds all of those capabilities. Very rarely will you find an entire team that holds all of those key capabilities. So it's a very complex problem to solve, and it's only getting more and more complex. One of the resources we'll share with you after today's webinar, or we'll point you at, is the Seven Skills shortage that's going on in the marketplace. So trying to get these individuals in a specific role is quite complicated. And I'm sure most of you on the call wear much more than one hat when it comes to sort of daily responsibilities. So let's go and take a look at each one of these individually. What we've tried to do is just look at the role, the value that brings to your program, and just get a brief understanding of the key skills that are required to be successful in that area. And again, don't think about this as just one individual. This is more a role and responsibility. It's one of those 7 skills. So you might find people pick up a few, or these are shared across other parts of your business. When it comes to SAM governance, there's a few different terms you could use in this area. Really, this is a leader for your SAM function. This is somebody who can implement best practices in line with those business and governance goals. Understanding a maturity curve and the journey that you need to go on, and communicating that to key stakeholders is quite the complex task. This might be something that we used to call process engineering, building the program, understanding how it needs to be implemented, what the business requires and how to deliver it is quite a complex task. And what that will allow you to do from a value perspective is get buy-in, provide accountability and ownership, executive management, because sometimes you have to manage these messages upwards, not necessarily downwards. And you need a clear measurement of success, because SAM is much broader than just creating a licensed position. Really what you want to be doing is implementing new processes to improve those positions. And that is no mean feat. So the key skills you need for this job would be leadership. SAM experience is really desirable, but it's not essential. And you'll see a little bit of this as we go through the presentation today. It's always nice to have experience in SAM, but as I said, it's quite difficult to find people who have implemented those programs and built those maturity curves and delivered them in large, complex organizations. So you might want something that's an applicable skill set. Obviously, communication is key, and this is now becoming a strategic objective. So this is not just about writing process definition documents. It's about implementing a new process that improves the practices in IT and support some of those things that we talked about in an evolving SAM landscape. Next one, licensing expertise. Very difficult to find. And the issues you find in this area is when somebody becomes a licensing expert, they usually become an expert in one publisher. So they go a mile deep on one particular publisher. Now, usually a program will include many more than one publishers for you to manage. 10, 20, 30, 50, we've seen even people managing up to 100 publishers. So this deep form of licensing expertise is very, very valuable, but it's not necessarily something you'd need to retain every day of the year. You might need an IBM, an Oracle, a Microsoft expert for a month or two as you go through managing your position and preparing for a true-up or a renewal or some kind of an investment milestone. But do you really want to keep a high-value IBM expert on the books for an entire year? Potentially, if they can evolve their role into some of these other key sets, but you'll usually find they have this deep expertise in that one particular area. So this is actually one of the most popular areas where people get outside help because they only need it during one of these compelling events. What are they here to do? They're here to perform complex licensing calculations to close the gaps that technology can't solve. You can't automate licensing across major publishers. It's just impossible. You can get a long way there, but you're always going to need somebody to interpret that data. And having a huge amount of experience in that publisher from a technical perspective is very, very valuable in helping you make sure that you've got an audit-ready position, because that's really the gold standard of where you're trying to get to. The other thing a licensing expert can do is get involved in really complex optimization. So rather than thinking about metering on desktops, you kind of want to be thinking about how you use certain products in a virtualized environment or non-Windows environment, and how you can try and optimize licensing to better suit your needs. That is very, very complicated and takes a huge amount of experience in one of those key areas. The value is that audit-ready position. It's providing these experts proactively. So if you can embed yourself in processes as people are building new technology in certain publishers, it's great to have that expertise. Audit defense, you'll see a few key roles here associated to audit defense, but having someone who can stand off against an auditor with that expert knowledge of a particular product or vendor is very, very important. And obviously, we're trying to drive value here, so savings through this complex optimization. It's a technical licensing expertise, not necessarily on the agreements or how you purchase. It's really about how those products are used in context within a complex environment. And that's the interpretation that you can't automate. Audit experience is preferable. Poacher or gamekeeper. Some of the best people I've ever seen in terms of an audit scenario have usually been facing off against them for a few years. But you also have very good expertise from people who were auditors in the past, because you understand the processes and the levers that can be pulled. And obviously this is heavily predicated on attention to detail and is a very, very analytical job. So these are the people you want to understand the base technology, not necessarily who can go out and negotiate the contracts for you, but quite difficult to find. Okay, contracts and legal. Couple of different areas where this is very important. Understanding how a contract works is very important to how you get to use the entitlement within that contract. This is often one of the big faux pas that people take or have. They think they've got enough licenses compared to what they use, and that's okay. But what's bedded deep into that contract is how you're allowed to use that product. So understanding the contractual terms and conditions is very important to understanding how you're allowed to use the licenses for that software. The other area it's quite important is supporting you with the negotiation, because again, ensuring those terms are favourable, that's a very important part. So not only understanding entitlement, but also looking forward into new entitlement purchases. Obviously, supporting an audit scenario, you might find that within your contract with that publisher, there is no audit clause. Very rare, but it's something you really want to understand, and you need the smarts to do that as well. And then obviously you want this oversight over the entitlement management process. If someone's loading in entitlement wrong because they haven't understood the terms and conditions, unfortunately what you're going to spit out at the end is an incorrect licensing position, and you're going to be making choices off an incorrect base of data. So the value there is this deep product usage rights understanding, ensuring that the entitlement's loaded correctly, aligning new terms in new contracts to ensure that they resolve some historic problems, but also suit your business moving forward. And it's another strong resource that you would need within an audit, understanding those contractual terms. Legal backgrounds are desirable, but you'll often find people who have been contracting experts within a procurement function. You really want someone who understands negotiation, although these guys might not front it for you. And obviously software-related experience is really, really important, because software contracts are very different than a lot of other contracts that you might find within an IT landscape. Okay, tools admin. If you're going to be successful, you're definitely going to need some technology. You might have bought a best-of-breed SAM tool, or you might have systems management products. You've got procurement tools, ITSM tools. All of these play a part within the ecosystem of an effective SAM function. So what you really need to understand from this perspective is, am I collecting the data correctly? Had many bad experiences where people are providing data, but there's key fields missing, or they have missed software data on a large number of assets. Again, once you get to the end of that process and you find the input data is incorrect, it can be a really frustrating experience, and all it's going to leave you with is an incorrect licensing position. You also want to make sure you're getting the best benefit from these tools. So keeping them upgraded and up to date might give you new features that improve your program. However, you do need the expertise to do that. You either retain that or again, in a lot of cases, having that tools expertise is something that people will often look outside their organization for, predominantly because they might not need it every day, and you might just need it for these big technical events. And the other thing to think about, which sort of feeds into where Sam has got to now, is understanding integration and how you report this data. You can have the best data in the world, but if you're not using it properly, you're sort of leaving value on the table. So how do I get this data that I've collected from an asset management function, and how do I feed it into ITSM? How do I get it into my lifecycle processes to ensure that people have access to this data all the time? The value here is making sure that the data is correct before it goes into your analytical phase. Getting the best out of the technology investments that you've already made, and really focus on that integration. There's huge amounts of effort and resource about getting clean data into things like ITSM tools or CMDBs. I'm yet to see one work really successfully. So it's a very difficult thing to do. And sometimes that might not be because the data is not fit for purpose. It just needs some technical smarts on how to get it into those third-party systems. So really, for this job, you want a very strong technical background, and preferably you'd have specific tool sets with the tools within the landscape. And again, this is just like licensing expertise. Somebody having a deep understanding of a SAM tool, an ITSM tool, a procurement tool, probably quite unlikely. So these might be borrowed resources from within your organization, or they might be things that you use from third parties when you have a big technical event. Project management. Don't underestimate the value of effective project management. This could really be the making of a project. If you think about SAM outside of just pure BAU, the implementation of your project is a huge task. If you're coming at SAM cold and you're implementing a new piece of technology, and you're hiring a team, and you're building processes, and you're collecting raw data around entitlement and contracts, and you're getting involved in complex metrics that can't be collected through the technology, something that we call non-instance data, so things that don't necessarily exist on a machine, and you're trying to deal with third parties who are providing support, we're now getting into the realms of quite a sophisticated project. And it's one that needs to be paid a lot of attention. So the project implementation is a really key part of doing this. We see this in greenfield sites, but you also might see it in somebody who's refreshing their program or buying new technology or trying to reinvest in an improved SAM service, or just evolving that SAM service to meet the needs of today's business requirements. Once it's implemented, you need someone to run that project BAU. That still takes a lot of effort because you're still collecting huge volumes of data, contract renewals, new individuals, delivering information to the business. It's a huge task just trying to hurdle the cats that are involved in this process, whether these be stakeholders in the SAM function or stakeholders outside that you're trying to either get data from or deliver information to. And there will be third parties involved in this. People will be selling you tools, people will be providing consultancy, giving you advice. So trying to bring that all together in a cohesive manner is really something that can't be underestimated. You need to do all of the upfront. If you do it right, the value is going to be all the upfront planning and expectation setting is good and accurate. Setting a good expectation will stop you from failing in your SAM program. You want a smooth implementation and a point of escalation to pull forward any of the issues and challenges that you face, because there will be some. And then obviously you want to manage an effective BAU process. So with the best of intentions, the best tools, the best people, if the project doesn't deliver on time or goes over budget or isn't fit for purpose, immediately that function starts to lose credibility amongst a senior leadership team. So doing all that upfront planning and ensuring that this is smoothly implemented and run is actually a very, very important job. Now, the key skills here, you'd ideally have someone who'd implemented a large strategic SAM project. But how many people have actually done that effectively within a large organization? They're going to be quite tricky to find. So when you're looking for a project manager, really what you want to be thinking about is large, complex projects with an IT focus. If it's not SAM, maybe think about something in the wheelhouse of SAM. If something like ITSM or an infrastructure project, understanding technology and how it works and dealing with all the moving parts is a really important skill here. So if you just bring somebody in who's got no IT experience, you're going to find the wealth of terminology, data points, complexity is probably going to cause a number of issues and make them less effective at delivering their job. Okay, let's look at the role. This is data processing. Even if you buy a SAM tool, there'll still be huge volumes of data elsewhere. Very rarely can you get absolutely everything from one place. And there's usually huge volumes of information flying around your organization. And as we expand the role of SAM within an organization, the data points just become even bigger. It used to just be what I've got deployed or what I'm using against what I own. And now we need to understand who's using it, how much they paid for it, when the renewals are coming up, what types of subscription it is, understanding the telemetry about how that relates back to a business function. There's a ton of how it feeds into my ITSM system, who's requesting it, who are we delivering that new solution to. All of these volumes of information take a huge amount of processing. And one of the big challenges within an IT landscape is the naming standards are all totally different. There's no consistency across all of those data points. So if you think about technology and how much information is flying around within a SAM function and all the peripheral functions that it's either consuming from or feeding into, now you need someone who's got some really good data skills, and that will be multiple data points. You don't necessarily need to have an understanding in the technology the data comes from, but you do need to understand how you manipulate the data and turn it into something valuable. Huge amount in the industry right now about the value in data, and unfortunately there's a huge amount of value being left on the table within an organization because they just don't have the requisite skills to manage those volumes or know what to do with it. This is to create reporting across a SAM function, and obviously there's also the ability to create automation in some of these data processing tasks. That will allow you to get this value from all of that information and start feeding intelligence into these other parts of the organization. It will allow you to consolidate consumption and entitlement data and then turn that into something valuable in those other third-party systems, or combine it with those third-party systems. And it will obviously give you the ability to get new data from new data points. That might be something that's new to your strategy. It might be the replacement of a product. As long as you have the skills and you know how to process that information, it doesn't really matter where the data is coming from. As long as the raw data is there, having those data processing skills will probably leave you with enough skills and intelligence to get a good value from it. So the key skills you need in terms of data processing is somebody who has a background of processing large volumes. That, unfortunately, is not a skill you hold within Excel or Access. You really want someone with database skills. And that might be SQL or DB2 or Oracle, whatever it happens to be. But the volumes that we're talking about now are so expansive that these things just can't be done in basic collaboration tools. So to give you an example, a customer recently that was processed in terms of their inventory database had over 7 billion records. And to process those volumes of information, sometimes for the larger businesses, can actually be the failing of an entire program. Either the technology or the system or the architecture or the individuals just don't have the ability to process those volumes, so you have to move forward without processing it. And that's an unfortunate side effect of not having the ability to sort of get involved in some of these large data processing exercises. But there will be huge volumes of data, and it will come from a lot of different places. Okay, I think this is the last of the 7 key skills. It's about commercial execution. Now, again, this might exist within your business, or there's some great organizations out in the marketplace who focus exclusively on this item. It's about contract negotiations. It's about managing suppliers and demand within an organization. So some of those will look like quite common expertise. When you're thinking about the value from it, these renewals that an organization have might be a trigger that you get to pull once every 3 to 5 years. So understanding the negotiation associated to that, which might lead back into the commercials, the pricing, the commercial structure, but it would also look at combining it with some of those contractual terms and conditions that we talked about earlier, means that you'll get the best commercial outcome based on this optimized position that your 7 key skill sets have been working on for the last 3 to 5 years to get you in the best position to get the best out of that contract. You really want to try and maintain a good working relationship with your publishers. We often find people are defensive or combative with publishers, and as those relationships degrade, unfortunately, the understanding and how that impacts Sam and the rest of the business, that all degrades too. So you want to try and maintain a good working relationship. And if you've got good information and you're optimized and you understand the software contracts, there's no reason why you can't lead those relationships and everybody walks away happy, because there's good, clean information at the back of it. And you want to leverage supplier motivations to optimize those deals. Publishers are really changing the way that they behave as we move into a new landscape. And if you don't understand how they're motivated, unfortunately, you're going to leave money on the table, because those are the levers that you want to pull during these 3 to 5 year big renewal negotiations. So you want a good, strong background in procurement or commercial. Software experience is really essential here. So if you get a deep understanding of a particular software contract, it's very, very valuable as you go into a particular negotiation. Now, some of those skills are transferable and some of them are very specific to that publisher. This again sort of falls into that category about how you find somebody who's negotiated 100 IBM contracts, because if it's just an internal function, you only get to do one every 3 or 5 years, depending on how you structure your agreements. So that software experience is really, really important. And then you want to have an understanding of geographical and tax implications. So there's been some great examples recently where there's been huge savings for organizations about where they place their orders and understanding the tax implications of how they're leveraging those contracts or how they're structured. So it's not necessarily something that was really front and center a few years ago, but again, getting the maximum benefit from this transaction that you have on a very infrequent basis is really, really important to ensure that those software contracts are optimized. If you've just done a ton of really hard work optimizing an agreement and unfortunately you get penalized on terms or you don't get the best benefit, a lot of that hard work unfortunately will go to waste. So those are our 7 key skills. Let's talk about the changing landscape, so how things are sort of moving forward. What you're looking at here is a view of where people report from an ITAM function in 2011 compared to 2018. So you can see there's a big increase in people coming into a CXO sort of leadership team. So that means ITAM's becoming more and more important. As ITAM becomes more important, people will pay more money for ITAM professionals. So just understand as you embark on this journey, these people are becoming more and more valuable to an organization, and that's really being reflected in their salaries. And for all you ITAM professionals in there, maybe it's time that you go and ask for a pay rise. But I'll leave that one to you. Can't give you advice on that one, unfortunately. Now, what is changing fundamentally in how things are being used is obviously the cloud. That is really starting to change the landscape and change the way that people consume technology. And that means it's really going to change, Sam. That classic environment where we used to just find out what was deployed and combine it with entitlement and create a licensing position has fundamentally changed. And that means the market now needs to start changing with it. So if you've just invested in all those skills on-prem, you now need to start thinking about how you evolve your program, your initiative for the future needs of a cloud landscape. And that is actually reflected in the areas that people are looking to add skill sets. So that first bar chart there is around cloud management and administration. And you can see it stands out loud and proud as the one thing that more people want to know about. Now, what that tells you is ITAM professionals understand where the market's going, but it also tells you that there's a massive skills gap there today. Because if that's what people really need help with, we're sort of already there. You know, the cloud is now currently upon us. So what's the conclusion? How do you get hold of these skills? Well, you can build it. You can go and build these requisite skills internally. You can hire people to operate your team. You can buy it. So you could go and outsource the entire function and get all those requisite skills from a third party. Or what you can do is a combination of both. And I would say that would probably be the most successful. You can't outsource, Sam, to 100%. You need an understanding and a knowledge of your business. And I think it's very difficult to retain all the requisite skills internally, just how broad software is and how diverse that skill set is. So these are your options, and some of the most successful programs that we've seen probably have a mixture of the both. And what would be my final takeaways? If you've invested in this area, get maximum value from it. You're going to do that with a good, effective team with this good set of skills. Play people in position. You know, we've laid out some positions today. You've probably got some good skills. Don't go and put a contract negotiator on a SQL database processing inventory data. It's just not going to work out. But understand what your people's skills are and play them in position. SAM is evolving. You need to be prepared for this changing landscape. You don't want it to overtake you, and then you're chasing to try and get that requisite skill set to manage this changing environment. And the final thing is, don't be afraid to get help. There's a ton of different ways that you can go and get help with a program. It might be around implementation, guidance, transformation services that allow you to build your program with someone who's done it a million times, or maybe you just go and consume some of those skills as you need them on an ad hoc basis. So, and obviously, if you want any extra information from Livingstone about that, we'll provide you all of our contact details. So I appreciate I'm almost out of time, but I am going to try and get to a couple of these questions very quickly. And for any of those who have raised a question and I couldn't get to it, we will get back in touch with you and answer that question for you, because I've obviously eaten up a bit too much time. One question here is, where's the best place to find SAM resources? Very good question. And as a SAM provider, it's very, very difficult. There are some expert recruiters in this space. I know organizations who refuse to use them and they only operate within their network. There are good SAM networks where you will find great SAM professionals, and hopefully one of them is free at that point in time. And another thing you need to think about for a SAM professional is maybe you want to grow your own. You might find somebody who doesn't have any of these requisite skills, but you could build them into a great SAM professional if they have the base smarts. And I'll do one more, and then unfortunately we're going to have to call it a day. What's the average number of people I should have in a SAM team? Well, it's obviously very highly impacted on how big your SAM function is, how mature it is, and how big your organization is. And one of the resources we're going to provide to you is an ebook, and there's actually a chart in there which will show you how many people have SAM resources associated to their assets. So I would send you off to that resource, and it will provide you the market functions there as well. So unfortunately, I've run out of time, so I really apologize if I didn't get to your question, but we will get back to you with answers to those questions. And I'd like to thank you all very much for joining. I hope you all found it useful.